Question number 5, Michael Mara.
To ask the First Minister, following the publication of NHS Tayside's due diligence review of documentation held relating to Professor Eljamel, whether the Scottish Government will immediately approve an independent public inquiry.
First Minister.
This is a deeply important issue, and I can inform the Chamber today that Health Secretary Michael Matheson will use his statement to the Chamber this afternoon to confirm that the Government has decided to commission a full independent public inquiry. This comes after very careful consideration of the recent due diligence review, which said concerns about Professor Eljamel were not acted on with the urgency they deserved. In commissioning an inquiry, it remains important that those people directly affected are still supported to find the answers they need, and that both staff and patients across Scotland know that lessons are being learned. The Cabinet Secretary has considered the latest report on NHS Tayside, and we have collectively concluded that this requires investigation independent of both the Board and indeed of the Scottish Government, and I agree with that. He will set out, the Cabinet Secretary for Health will set out the details of the next steps in his statement this afternoon.
Michael Mara.
Scottish Labour welcomes that inquiry. It should not have taken us so long to get here. This inquiry has been wrung out of the Government like blood from a stone by Jules Rose, Pat Kelly and the many victims who were weeping outside this Parliament yesterday, many in permanent, debilitating pain. As late as last week, the First Minister and Health Secretary maintained a public inquiry would not take place. And that damning internal review that he mentions from NHS Tayside says they knew Eljamel was incapable and dishonest, and yet allowed him to continue unchecked. That review also revealed that the NHS Tayside Board has done nothing to deliver on a raft of recommendations from previous reports into this scandal. What will the First Minister do today to ensure those recommendations are acted on immediately?
First Minister.
I say that I disagree with Michael Mara's characterisation. Both the Health Secretary and I have always said that a public inquiry has not been ruled out. But I hope Michael Mara would understand that it is appropriate that we allow reviews, like the due diligence review that was taking place, to progress right to the end of its conclusion. And in doing so, having seen the extremely disturbing detail of that due diligence review, the Cabinet Secretary for Health, and we discussed this at Cabinet on Tuesday, the Government has come to the conclusion that a public inquiry is therefore necessary because of the failings that report has exposed. So let's be clear about two things. First and foremost, that Professor Eljamel is responsible for his despicable actions, but where there are systemic failings, then they must absolutely be exposed, they must be interrogated, and lessons must be learned, and that's why public inquiry is so importantly. And secondly, let me agree in a point of consensus with Michael Mara that while many MSPs, I have to say, deserve credit for raising these issues, it is, of course, to the credit of the brave patients who have spoken out about the suffering that they have endured. Jules Rose, Pat Kelly and many others that have raised these issues. They deserve the credit for this announcement around the public inquiry. There is still a further question for us to explore, and Michael Matheson will lay this out in detail in his statement. It is whether or not there will need to be another process alongside the public inquiry that answers the very individual patient questions that rightly patients have in terms of their individual cases, something that a public inquiry would not necessarily be able to do.
Liz Smith.
Thank you. Can I also welcome this decision, but can I pay very considerable tribute to Jules Rose, to Pat Kelly and to all the other patients who for 10 years have been fighting this case. Could I ask the First Minister if, aside from the public inquiry, the Scottish Government will consider a victim support fund for the former patients and their families?
First Minister.
Again, there are, of course, as Liz Smith knows well, appropriate routes in relation to compensation that families can go through when it comes to health boards. And of course, if there are other avenues that we can explore to support patients, then we will give that consideration. But there are already established avenues for patients who have suffered as a result of the NHS to be able to claim compensation. But they can at times be difficult to navigate, so we will give consideration to any other avenues of support that we can provide. I do want to mention that there's been a good cross-party effort. I know MSPs such as Shona Robinson, Joe Fitzpatrick, John Swinney, Jim Fairley, Graham Day, Willie Rennie, Michael Mara have all raised these issues, but I think it is important to pay perhaps particular credit to Liz Smith, who has raised these issues for many years diligently and in a considered manner, and I thank all the MSPs who have raised these important issues on behalf of the patients they represent.
Question number 6, Ross Greer.